Thank you everybody for being here tonight. I know it's late on a Thursday night, but I appreciate that you're here. And I really want to say thank you to Holly for inviting me to come and talk tonight and remind you all of all the wonderful things the Cancer Supportive Care Program at Stanford offers to patients. So if you haven't picked up one of the brochures, the more laminated ones, please grab one of those because there's a lot of benefits beyond the lectures tonight that we can offer. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So when Holly asked me to give this talk on sugar and health, I was like, oh man, this is a really complicated topic. So my disclaimer in the beginning is to say 1 hour, is not enough time to fully cover this topic. Probably not even a whole day seminar or even a whole college course. This is a multifaceted, controversial, fascinating topic. So we'll just scratch the surface tonight. If at any point you feel like you have, a brief comment that you want to interject, I would encourage you, let's keep this interactive so it's not just me talking to you guys. I'll probably repeat your question. That way the people listening on the web can also hear the question. Or if you talk really loud, maybe we won't have to, but I'll still repeat it just in case. So again, please ask questions. Maybe keep them kind of concise so we can keep good flow to the talk tonight, but I would encourage you to interact. Okay, so thank you, Holly. Here we go. A quick objective review. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of sugar in the human food system and how it came to be around us so much. We're going to talk about its effect on the human body and what actually happens when we consume sugar and how that affects our health and different disease states. We're going to talk about some of the many recommendations that there are about sugar intake, although these are constantly evolving. And then more important and more practically, how do we apply this information and how do we incorporate it into our life? So, and again, I'm not a historian on sugar, but it was interesting to do a little research and find out how this has grown over time in our food supply. Honey was one of our very first sweeteners available, and that makes sense because where does honey come from? Honeybees, some brave soul, looked inside a beehive one day and found a sweet, syrup in there. And so that's readily available and easy to obtain. So then we started looking, we're humans and we explored different other plants and what, have different tastes. And sugarcane was one of the first plants that really took off as far as a sugar source in the diet. So has anyone eaten raw sugarcane or seen raw sugarcane? Yeah, there's a few people. Well, there's a picture of it coming up, but it almost looks like a really big, like bamboo almost. And on the inside, if you chew on it, it's sweet. But there sure is a lot of fiber and texture you got to get through to get to that sweet taste. But nonetheless, from ancient times, we've been using sugarcane. But it wasn't until the 5th century AD, still a long time ago, that sugar became crystallized. So before it was these long canes and they would, extract a little syrup out of it, but syrup isn't really easily transportable. So then they dried it out, they figure out some way to dry it out and it became like a form of granulated sugar or like raw sugar. And then they were able to take it on the move because sugar cane grows near the equator. So how would people in Europe get it, in Northern Europe especially, or different parts of the world? So when they crystallize it, they were able to send it out and about, and it became, part of commodities and in circulation amongst humans across the globe. So then that was 5th century. Now we're going to skip all the way to the 18th and 19th century. And that's when when sugar became almost readily available in Europe. It was mostly for the haves of society, not the have-nots, but it was a luxury food because it was still, something that came a long way in the 18th and 19th century, but people were aware of it and it was used in cooking. This was also around the same time that the sugar beet became another source of sugar. And sugar beets are commonly, another sugar source in our diet today. Anyone driven through Tracy lately? And you can smell the Holly sugar beet factory. I grew up near there, so I know that sugar beet smell. So here's a picture of these. And again, not necessarily something you'd be like, sweet and candy, right? But once you do a significant amount of processing on these, you get these, what we know as table sugar. And essentially, cane sugar versus beet sugar, you probably wouldn't be able to detect the difference by the time it gets into our diet, or the time it's processed to the point where we use it. So that was its transition through time. Now, how about our transition in eating sugar? So for a little perspective, around in the 1700s, whoever kept this data or was able to find this data, they said that the average Englishman, so we're talking British times, because that's where it was one of the first places it became, a commodity of sorts. An average Englishman consumed around 4 pounds of added sugar per year. And we're going to talk more in detail about this term added sugar, but please keep that in mind here. By 1800, the average man consumed 18 pounds of added sugar per year, still the Englishman. Then we're going to transition to Americans nowadays. And there's different numbers on what they estimate, but in a few different places they've said 22 teaspoons of added sugar each day, which equates to about 77 pounds of added sugar per year. So pretty big jump from 4 pounds per year to 77 pounds per year. Anything that changes that significantly in our diet is likely to have an effect on our health, right? Positive or negative, right? We also have increased access to a lot of other different things, and malnutrition over time is decreased as we had access to adequate amounts of healthy foods. So there's the good and the bad of food industry and food production growth. So please keep that in mind. It's not just all bad news. We've eradicated a lot of nutritional deficiencies over time. So what happens to sugar in the body? So here's some boring biochemistry stuff. Sugars are these simple carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are these things called monosaccharides, disaccharides, and oligosaccharides. Generally, the sugars are these monosaccharides and disaccharides. Glucose, or also known as dextrose, fructose, and galactose are monosaccharides. When you have two, and mono means one, just to give you, some of you may be more or less familiar with these terms. Disaccharide means two, so it's two of these sugar chains that are connected. So sucrose, or table sugar, is glucose connected to a fructose, and they're a little compound. And then those oligosaccharides, those are many, many compounds bound together to form one big carbohydrate chain. So again, there's lactose. Many of you have probably heard this term if you're lactose intolerant especially. That's glucose with galactose, or glucose and glucose. There's a few different forms of this depending on the chemical shape, and that's maltose. And then galactose and fructose is this other sugar called lactulose. So again, generally these monodisaccharides, simple carbohydrate chains, are sugars. And sugars provide us with 4 calories per gram. Again, here's just some background basic information. Complex carbohydrates, so a grain, 1 gram of sugar has 4 calories. 1 gram of carbohydrate from quinoa also has 4 calories. But, there's a difference there between a gram of sugar and a gram of quinoa, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But calories, the same. Grams or calories per gram of protein is also 4 grams. Calories per gram of fat is 9 grams, and alcohol has 7 calories per gram. So when you see something like fat provides more than twice as many calories than a gram of sugar, this was why, and one of the reasons why, maybe 20, 30 years ago, the trend was low-fat everything, right? It just, you look at it and it makes sense. Fat provides 9 calories per gram. We're all gaining too much weight. Cut out the fat, right? When we keep this data on what people are eating over the years, fat intake has gone down in the last 50, 100 years. Nonetheless, we've still continued to gain weight. So the simple thought about, and this is as a population, not necessarily as an individual, but when we look at society. So then it has public health professionals and scientists and the public saying, well, what do we do now? We've cut back on fat and we're getting fatter anyway. So what can we do? So then we're looking at, well, maybe it's not fat, maybe it's something else in our diet. And certainly sugar intake has been on the rise, so we're looking at that. But now sugar, innately, we love sugar, right? Humans love sugar. It tastes good. The first thing you taste, when you're an infant is milk. and milk has that natural sugar in it, lactose, and that's sweet to the taste. So it's kind of an innate thing. So it stimulates the pleasure centers in our brain, and we get positive feedback to eat more of it. Sugar is used to make food more palatable, and it is a significant source of calories, good or bad. It gives us a lot of our energy or calories that we need to function and have our body function on a daily basis. It's approximately 13% of the energy or calories in our diet is from added sugars based on the data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the US. I'll stipulate that. Each country is different. Most of the data we're going to talk about is United States. So let's consider this picture. When you see this, do you get a positive thought or do you get a negative thought? Positive. I mean, so everyone's different, right? Some people are like, oh, cavities, or some people are like, wow, that's a lot of fake coloring and fake sugar and stuff like that, right? But overall, for most people, especially if you're not one that reads all the stuff about sugar and health, you might think, oh, that's fun, and it's delicious and it's a treat. How do we think about something like this, like Martha? I know it's harder to see because it's all white, but Martha Stewart fancy cakes and those delicious macarons and all that stuff. Also, probably a positive thought, right? I mean, these things taste delicious. And this is super fancy, so you feel like it's an extra special treat more than just, some candy bar, like some candies, Runts and Skittles and stuff. I'll say brand names in here tonight, but I'm not picking on anything in particular. It's just whatever comes to my mind. Or like Coca-Cola, for example. Now, what do we think when we see this? Do we think positive or negative? Same like Martha Stewart cake feeling. You think, oh my gosh, look at that double gulp. And has anyone seen that? The doctor that called sugar poison. So he's real famous now. According to a talk I was watching in preparation for this that he gave in Texas, they have a Texas big gulp or whatever double gulp that's even bigger than they're always trying to outdo the next thing. So, I mean, this is a lot of soda, and this is not something we think, oh, healthy and special and fancy, right? We think, wow, that's a lot of sugar. And this picture is showing the transition, from maybe the 30s or 40s size Coca-Cola bottle up to modern day, and who's to say we're not gonna get a bigger one. I think they've even made cup holders in cars bigger to accommodate things like this. So now we've identified sugar, we've talked a little bit about the biochemistry. What actually happens when we eat sugar in our diet? So we take it in by our mouth, we do some mechanical digestion by chewing, right? There are enzymes in our mouth that help start the breakdown of sugars amongst other things, but it's called salivary amylase. Then we get food into our stomach where there's more mechanical digestion, your stomach kind of churns food around, and then there's also some chemical digestion, which are again enzymes and different things that help break down sugars. It gets in these small, we can't take like a piece of quinoa and get that in our bloodstream, right? So we break it down into these small components, those mono and disaccharides again, and that's where in our small intestine they enter the bloodstream. They're able to pass the intestinal borders in these smallest forms and get into our bloodstream where they're out throughout our body. It sends it out to the muscles and the heart and all the places we need to use it for energy. So it goes out to every cell in our body. Now, what seems to matter is how quickly this happens and to what extent it happens. So just like I was saying earlier, 4 grams of sugar, or 1 gram of sugar has 4 calories. 1 gram of carbohydrate from like a whole grain also has 4 calories. But how quickly we digest those things is different because of the structure of the carbohydrate. So who's heard of this thing, glycemic index? Yeah, okay, so a few people have, but I'll torture you with explaining it again. Glycemic index is one way, it's pretty popular right now, and it's not the be-all and end-all, but it's a good way to understand why there's a difference between sugar and the quinoa. So again, I'm not pushing quinoa, it's just our example, okay? So if you eat an equivalent amount of grams of sugar and an equivalent amount of grams of quinoa, When something is considered high glycemic index, so sugar is high glycemic index, just pure table sugar, that's the red line. And what that's showing you on this vertical, on this column here, whichever way, yeah, vertical, that's right, huh? That's showing blood sugar rising quickly, because this line here is time. So the red line is showing a quick rise in blood sugar in a pretty short amount of time. What the yellow line shows, the low glycemic index, that's what GI stands for here, that shows a much smaller rise in blood sugar and over a longer period of time. So glycemic index is this thing that's how much a food raises our blood sugar and in what time compared to the reference standard, which I think is like a piece of white bread or something like that, which they consider like a high glycemic food. So this helps us to know which foods are going to raise our blood sugar the most and the most quickly. And why we care about that in terms of health, and especially, we're here for part of the cancer supportive care program, so we're going to try to highlight some of the cancer aspects of this, is when we stimulate our body to have a quick rise in blood sugar levels, that is also telling our body to have a quick rise in insulin levels. Do you all know, are you familiar with insulin? So insulin is a hormone made by our pancreas that allows us to take sugar out of our blood and get it into our cells where we need it for energy, because the little mitochondria and these little components in our cells need a fuel source to keep going and to keep doing their normal functions. Insulin, while it's important to get that job and to get it in there, if we have high circulating levels of insulin, insulin is also a growth hormone. So because of insulin, and all these are simplified, this is a very complicated thing, but I'm giving you the simple version. Insulin will promote more cell growth. Like as kids, we have more, we need more insulin levels or more insulin in our body to help us grow. It's a growth hormone. Or if we get too much insulin, when we don't need it, we grow more fat cells or we gain weight. So high blood sugar rise stimulates more insulin rise, which is a growth hormone. It's a growth hormone for making us bigger. It is also one of the ways that cancer cells can grow. And if anyone here has certain or knows anyone who is treated with treatments that target insulin-like growth factor, if that's familiar to anyone, that's one pathway that we're trying to design drugs to target certain types of cancers. But cancer's not quite that straightforward, right? If you target that one pathway, it can get clever and find another one. And then maybe it doesn't even use that pathway at all. It uses a totally different one, so you can't even target it that way. So that's just something, it's one reason why we think insulin and blood sugar and sugar, thus, play a role in cancer, but not the only role. So I don't ascribe to the sugar feeds cancer just like that straightforward of a sentence. It's just too complicated to say that one phrase, in my opinion. So we have an explanation of glycemic index. So now what about, this was popular, but this got some flack from dietitians because what do you think are high glycemic index foods? Just straight glycemic index. Can anyone say anything out loud? We said sugar and white bread already. Any other thoughts? Ketchup? Yeah, we'll have to check. I mean, there's big charts. It's probably somewhere in there. Yes. Mm-hmm. Candy. Mm-hmm. Pardon? Carbs? Yeah, it depends. I mean, all carbs have the potential to raise blood sugar. Some do it quicker than others. What's tricky, carrots are high glycemic index. Technically high glycemic index. But carrots, anyone here ever have diabetes? Carrots don't actually raise your blood sugar. And so that's why just glycemic index is not super helpful. We need to know about glycemic load. That takes into account how much of a carbohydrate you're likely to eat at a meal. Who's going to eat 7 carrots? Like, yeah, that may be able to make your blood sugar rise quickly, but that's a lot of carrots to eat. So this takes into account perspective, basically, the glycemic load. So I'm more of a glycemic load proponent because it gives you perspective. So a carrot is a low glycemic load food. So this, again, like Atkins craze, they were like, don't eat carrots. Like this was part of the reason why they said don't eat carrots. But it's not, people say they're high in sugar. They're not. So glycemic load takes into account how much of the carbohydrate you're likely to eat. It also takes into account some other factors like how you're going to cook the carbohydrate. Like something like al dente pasta, where it's really firm, has a lower glycemic index than really soggy noodles that have been cooked till the point of like limpness. I mean, it doesn't change it, from low to high, but it changes it within, a significant range. Or, what do you think ice cream, high or low glycemic index? You would say high, right? It's high in sugar. But because there's so much fat in ice cream, it helps lower the glycemic load. So, she says, yippee. So it's complicated. Its glycemic load really has to do with like pure sugar and the like quick kind. So like I like to pick on pixie sticks for this one. Imagine it's like powdered puff sugar that you like take in a blast. That's like gonna hit your blood sugar super fast. But again, something like boiled wheat berries and the farro and like quinoa and that you got to chew that for a long time. Then that's going to sit in your stomach for a little while and churn, and then eventually it's going to make your blood sugar rise a little bit, but nothing like that pixie stick. Hope you know what that is. If you don't know what a pig, it's this powdered sugar that comes in this tube, and you like rip the top off and you just like throw it back, and it's powdered sugar that's like fruity flavor. It's awesome and terrible. So okay. So glycemic load. So if at the end of this talk, there's a bunch of like sites and recommended websites for learning more. I know they're not on the handout there, but this site this presentation will be up on the website, the Stanford YouTube channel, and so you'll be able to look, or you can use some of the search terms, like if you say glycemic load, Harvard School of Public Health, or something like that. If you can kind of see it, even if you don't type in the exact right address at the end, you'll get the right page. So there's really good resources for learning more about this stuff. So here's like more examples of high glycemic load or low glycemic load. I've pointed out the load ones because I think that's more important. So white rice, apple juice, instant oatmeal, baked potato, raisins, those are high glycemic load. This is not a complete list, obviously. These are a few examples. Low glycemic load, tomato juice, beans, carrots, and peas. Right here again, you think carrots and peas. Oh, if anyone has diabetes, again, you have to count those for carbs, but it's still not the same as pixie stick when you have a carrot or pea. Rye or pumpernickel or whole grain bread, milk, and ice cream are these lower glycemic index. Dr. Lustig, that I was talking about earlier, and a few other scientists are also kind of, and there's a lot of the anti-high fructose corn syrup too, right? Because high fructose corn syrup is a lot more fructose. So if we think back to those monosaccharides, fructose is one of them. So that is metabolized a little bit different in our body. And so some people and scientists are really promoting anti-fructose in particular. Fructose is also what's in fruit. Mostly it's the main fruit sugar. They're not really talking as much concern about whole fruit. It's more about these isolated fructose sugars that are added to foods. But some people say, well, there's more than just sugar as a problem because so much of the sugar now is coming from this fructose sugar that maybe there's something unique about fructose. So we'll just mention it because it's kind of interesting and it's out there and it might be worth looking into more. When we eat a lot of fructose, this doesn't go through the exact same pathway as if you ate glucose or something, or some of the other mono and disaccharides. It goes directly to the liver. And if we don't use it right away, it like basically becomes stored pretty quickly. And there's a condition called non-alcoholic steatohepatitis or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease that we are finding more and more people are having liver failure from overweight and obesity, and it's this liver failure, which you would have thought before was cirrhosis or alcohol or, different inherited conditions. But now it appears to have this big link with overweight and obesity. And one of the reasons they think there's all this fat deposition in the liver is from high fructose. So it's just an interesting thing to maybe look into, or that you might be hearing more about on the horizon if we can. So we know that sugar intake on the rise. So these things are hard to study. If you can imagine, how do you say cause and effect for different things people are doing in their diet, and something that happens over a lifetime? Kids nowadays, they're becoming more and more obese. So there's a shorter amount of time frame we can study these things in versus, 50 years. Maybe you can look at the first 20 years of someone's life and see what are their behaviors and what are the things they're doing that make one child more obese than the other, or one child obese and one child not. But worldwide obesity has doubled since 1980, according to the World Health Organization. So that's worldwide. In 2014, more than 1.9 billion adults were overweight, and of those, 600 million obese. These are huge numbers, right? This is a lot of people that are overweight or obese. And this was a powerful statement, I thought. Obesity is preventable. We could be preventing this. It's just, that is a fact and point. So why is this still happening though, and why is it on the rise? It's not even like plateauing or declining. So diets that are high in sugar and probably high in fat are likely a contributing factor to obesity. We have to obviously point that out. Now, it's not just food too, right? It's physical activity, it's stress, it's all of our, there's many, many factors. All of those many, many factors make studying this super difficult. So if anyone here is PubMed savvy and tries to do a PubMed search and look for sugar and obesity with a few limiting criteria on it, there are thousands and thousands of studies out there, and they do these meta-analyses and these review articles to try to find, are several studies finding the same conclusion? Because you can go look crazy if you do, try to scroll through and look for all these studies. So some fun scientists have done that for us. So you will still not find many studies that will overtly be like, sugar contributes to obesity. They really just don't even say that, to be honest. They'll say, oh, it appears to have trends and that kind of stuff. There is not a clear linear connection that they can point out scientifically, but we all kind of think it and know it. But scientists have to prove this to be the case with research. So it's really complicated, and I say this in detail to kind of set the tone for sugar and every other condition we're going to talk about. There's significant scientific agreement, but hard and fast data is really difficult to find out there about the direct connection between sugar intake and obesity. Sugary drinks get particular attention. Sugar-sweetened beverages, whatever you want to call them, they have a bunch of different names that they're referred to. They're unique because sugar-sweetened beverages, like that Coca-Cola picture we saw, none of us were you can hardly find a redeeming quality in there other than refreshing and kind of tasted good that one day, right? Sugary drinks contain a lot of calories. They're pure added sugar with caffeine and coloring and flavors, but nothing else. No vitamins, no minerals, no fiber, none of that, right? Not even particularly hydrating because of all the sugar and the caffeine that's in them. So they give us a lot of calories, and guess what? Whoever is I'm so full after that Coke, I just can't eat anything else. No one says that. Coke is the thing that goes along with your meal, and that other thing is filling you up. So they're not satisfying or satiating is the term we like to use. Sugar-sweetened beverages comprise 6 to 7% of overall calorie intake in the U.S. That's a lot when you think about how many people live in the United States. Certain organizations will make firmer standpoints, but even still, the organizations, all kind of they try to be scientifically accurate, and then, there's some conspiracy theorists that say, too many industry people involved. But the Obesity Society says there is enough data to link sugar-sweetened beverages and obesity, especially in children. But even then, even to say, oh, we'll link them, it's still not yes, a really strong statement, even though probably everyone in here may be biased and think, yes, there's plenty of data. So that was a little bit about obesity. Kind of crazy to think they're not saying sugar is related, for sure related, but this is what we're with our science. So sugar and diabetes, also another one where the American Diabetes Association won't necessarily say eating too many sugars or too many carbs causes diabetes, but they do agree that sugary drinks are linked to type 2 diabetes. They think there's enough scientific evidence to say sugar-sweetened beverages are linked to type 2 diabetes. But they also have the general claim, and this is what most organizations would say, but what we as individuals and just the public kind of get bored of hearing is a diet high in calories from any source contributes to weight gain. Well, it's okay, we know that, but that doesn't, the thing is most people know that. Most people that are health conscious know that. And yet, why isn't it working? Why are we all still gaining more weight than we should over the years? Or as a society. And so because a diet high in calories from any sorts contributes to weight gain, and overweight is one of the biggest factors for diabetes, that's where they say the link is between sugar and diabetes, is because of the overweight factor. And that's what most of the science we can feel strongly enough saying. So then sugar and cancer. Similarly, the American Cancer Society says by promoting obesity, a high sugar intake may indirectly increase cancer risk. But even here they say indirectly, you know. This is a controversial point because I would say half my patients that come to see me are like, oh, and I'm avoiding sugar because I know it feeds cancer or causes cancer or whatever. You know, I don't say it so black and white like that, but I do think that we should be, you know, on the American Institute for Cancer Research, we're going to talk about what they say. There is some kind of connection there that we should be taking seriously and that we should change our life and diet about. Yes, sir?
Wouldn't it be very simple to take a large population of, say, middle-aged people, say men or women, doesn't matter, who are underweight, and check their livers and the fats and all these things that you've done, and then take a whole large population of obese people and check the same items, and then see if liver fat is related to sugar and obesity and all that. And it could take a large enough sample, you should get a very reliable result.
So his question is, could we not take a group of people that are thin or underweight and check their liver, and take a group of people that are overweight or obese and check like their liver and some of their health parameters, and make a conclusion from that about, you know, well, so you have to say, well, what did people actually eat? Because what are the factors that led to that person being underweight or not? So we say, well, what have you been eating last week? What did you eat last year? What did you eat 10 years ago? You know, we have to obtain all this information because life is not just one snapshot in time, it's accumulation of exposure over time. So the tricky thing about the science is cause and effect is really hard to prove. Links and connections and correlation is much easier, but for people to say cause and effect, there has to be very clear scientific data for. So that's why you get all these like more moderate recommendations, because they're hard to connect cause and effect.
Or is it because the lobbies are...
No, I mean, I think scientists really want to be able to prove, I think passionate scientists believe that there is a link, or that there's cause and effect, but to do that study is super challenging to do. And you can't take someone normal weight, feed them a high calorie diet to induce diabetes, to induce these things, because that's not ethical, you know? So then we just rely on obtaining information about what people do and making correlations between that. So there's stuff done in test tube, you know, and stuff done in animals, and then we try to do it as ethically as possible in humans, but sometimes what pans out in a test tube or an animal isn't true for a human being when we study it. So it's complicated, but we're still trying. They're still looking, and they're still trying to adjust the way they do studies and find clear cause and effect, because ultimately we want to be able to give good recommendations that will work to people to change their health. So we'll get to the recommendations. You see, even if we have not a lot of great data, the recommendations still say the right thing. So we'll get there. So the American Heart Association, they were a little bit more first to kind of say things a little strongly. So good job, American Heart Association. This was just actually a recent study in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Getting too much added sugar in your diet could significantly increase your risk of dying from cardiovascular disease. That's a pretty strong statement. You know, we don't have one of those for cancer. I wish we did. And what they found in this study, people that consumed 17 to 21% of total calories from added sugar had a 38% higher risk of dying from cardiovascular disease compared to those who consumed 8% of their calories from added sugar. So that's pretty significant. Now, not very many people consume only 8% of their calories from added sugar. So those patients, here's the other tricky thing, those patients that ate such a low sugar diet probably did a lot of other things healthier than the people that ate a higher sugar diet. And then, of course, I mean, we think maybe this isn't a big deal, but tooth decay is a huge problem. 92% of US adults have some kind of dental caries or dental cavities or some kind of oral health disease that could have been prevented with different behaviors or with diet. So the American Dental Association also has some recommendations because sugar, they say, is a major contributor to this as well. And our teeth and our mouth, that is the portal to our digestive tract. So it's hugely important. We used to just think, oh, cosmetic or just being able to chew or something like that. But if you've ever had to go and get major dental work done, now they give you some antibiotics because you can get a serious heart infection, or there's a lot of links between oral health and other conditions. So it's not just up here. Our whole body is these interconnected systems. And similarly, I really like thinking about that when we think about, sugar and cancer, or sugar and, everyone thinks sugar and diabetes, but all of our health systems in our body are connected. So just trying to focus on one thing, you're missing out on the big picture. We look at these microscopic things and ask one simple research question, but we got to expand the scope and look bigger. And how does this affect the human, not just this one metabolic pathway? So what are the recommendations? So, we've kind of reviewed the science that's not like super duper strong, but the recommendations, thankfully, even without, like the best rock solid data, they still are pretty good. The American Institute for Cancer Research, if you haven't been to that website, it's an excellent one for anyone that's interested in cancer and health information. They say avoid sugary drinks. I love it when I see avoid, because for organizations to make avoid statements, they feel strongly about it and they feel that there's enough data to say something strong. Because most of the time it'll be like limit, cut back, these kind of more loose. So avoid sugary drinks, limit consumption of energy-dense foods. The American Cancer Society says limit your intake of sugar-sweetened beverages such as soft drinks, sports drinks, fruit-flavored drinks. Going back to the AICR one, what do you think energy-dense foods are? The only problem with this phrase is like, who the heck knows what that is, other than dietitians? What do you think that means, energy-dense? Anyone have an idea? Someone said red meat, someone said power bar. So any other guesses? So energy-dense, if you just think of it like a physics equation or whatever, it's a lot of calories in a small space or in a small amount of food. So those things tend to be things with a lot of fat and a lot of sugar. So that's kind of, I wish they would just kind of say it, but instead they say energy-dense foods. The problem is energy-dense also says is things like nuts. Like nuts are technically energy-dense, but nuts are nutrient-dense, which means lots of nutrition in a small place. And what they mean here by energy-dense is lots of calories, but not necessarily a lot of nutrients. Because again, creme brulee is very energy-dense, but not nutrient-dense. Delicious, though, right? So the American Heart Association, they came out with more specific recommendations. Now, you see this less than 9 teaspoons per day or 150 calories per day of added sugar for men, 6 teaspoons per day or 100 calories per day for women. I like that they have specific recommendations like that, but I also don't like my patients to be obsessing about food where they're measuring and weighing and that. Food should be, in my opinion, a little bit more normal and innate. And, anyway, but that's a personal thing. But if you're one that if you're an engineer in the room and you like to tabulate and know exactly how much and all that, these are the guidelines. It would be an interesting challenge, and I would encourage any of you to do it. I've not been able to succeed at it yet. Try to actually count up how many added grams of sugar you have for 1 or 2 days and see how you compare to the recommendations. And we can talk about how we can try to do that.
What do you define added sugars?
Great question. So what is an added sugar? Anyone want to just hear my spiel, or does anyone want to take a guess? Okay. Added sugars are something that is not the naturally occurring sugar and that is added to a food to make it taste differently. So, because people ask me a lot oh, well, it's 100% juice, And that's not technically added sugar, but that's basically sugar-sweetened beverage because you've taken all the fiber away. And who's made fresh squeezed orange juice here? How many oranges do you need to make like 1 cup of juice? Like 6, right? Who sits down and eats 6 oranges at one time? Like that, some people do, but it's very unusual. But it's really easy to down that orange juice really quick. So you got all the sugar from those 6 oranges, none of the fiber, and by the way, you probably could chug it pretty quick, especially if it's really delicious orange juice. So that's one of the sticky things about juice. Even if it's 100% juice, I consider it added sugar or a sugar-sweetened beverage. So added sugar, though, and a lot of people say, well, honey, but that's the natural sugar, the first one we ate, right? But what do you do with honey? You're adding it to another food to make that food sweeter. So that's how I say the added sugars. Yes, it has some minerals and it has some phytochemicals that make it a little bit better than table sugar, but it's still added sugar. So, if you can pick one over the other, I'd say, yeah, okay, go for honey, go for maple syrup, but still try to use less of it. Try to train your mouth out of wanting that food to taste sweeter than it already is. So a naturally occurring sugar, a not added sugar, would be apple, banana, mango, the little bit of sugar that's in sweet corn or carrots or something like that. Those are naturally occurring sugars, and we don't limit those. We don't recommend limiting those. And the American Heart Association doesn't recommend limiting those. Weight Watchers doesn't recommend limiting those. If anyone's done that, you can eat as many fruits and vegetables you want. You don't have to count those anymore for points. The American Institute for Cancer Research, no one's recommending not eating fruits and those naturally occurring sugars, but we are recommending limiting added sugars. So thank you for asking. The World Health Organization, currently their recommendations are for less than 10% of calorie intake to come from added sugars. So then based on the average diet, average calorie needs of the average reference person, that's 12 teaspoons per day. That's a lot more than the American Heart Association. There are current proposed guidelines that were open for public comment, but it's closed now, so sorry, it's too late for us. But you could have made a comment about the proposed World Health Organization change that will now say 5% of calorie intake from added sugar or less. So now here's where we get to talk a little bit about the industry influence, like you were alluding to over there. When the big organizations like this come out with recommendations like this, guess who goes crazy? Pepsi, Coke, again, we'll be brand specific. Anyone that makes food with a lot of added sugar, and the lobbyists and things, they don't like to see that. That means cutting into their profits, You would hope that they would care about keeping people alive longer to eat their food longer, but in the meantime, anyway, so they get upset when these things come out. Thankfully, the World Health Organization has stood their ground and been like, we're saying it because it's the right thing. It doesn't matter what the industry says. So their proposed guidelines, we'll see what they actually make it to publish and are the things we see. Are 5% of calories or less, are about 6 teaspoons per day, which is again similar to the American Heart Association. What I like about the more extreme guidelines is, to me, it's okay to say these hard to do goals, because if we get a little closer to it, that's success. If you put a goal that's looser and then you don't feel like you have to do as hard of work to get to it, you're not likely to try as hard. So even if it's an extreme kind of goal, if we get people to move even a few percentages closer to it, it's beneficial on a population basis. American Dental Association, keep added sugar in your diet to a minimum by making wise food and beverage choices. So another thing about added sugars, or healthy food versus more junky food, is displacement. This is my approach with my patients. I really don't, there are certain foods that that are bad foods. They really are. Again, the PC and dietitians like to say, oh, there's no bad foods. Every food can fit and all that kind of stuff. I think there are some things we should not be eating, period. Or, it should be like very, very, very rarely. So what's the problem is when we fill up on this category here, what were you not eating that you should have been eating that gave you vitamins, that gave you minerals, that gave you phytonutrients, that gave you fiber, that didn't cause dental cavities, that didn't cause obesity, that didn't cause heart disease, that didn't clean out your colon really well for you. If you fill up on the junk food, you're less likely to eat the foods that your body actually needs. Again, here's energy density, but not nutrient density. The veggies and the fruits over there, those are nutrient dense and not energy dense. So I like the whole, and I don't like to tell my patients a lot of like, don't eat this. A lot of people say, what shouldn't I eat? And I tell them a few things, but they're kind of surprised when it's like, is that all I shouldn't eat? I'm like, I'd rather you think about what should I eat? What should I be filling up on? And if you focus on what should you be eating, there's not as much room for the things you shouldn't be eating, and they'll be in balance that way. You can't have a cancer nutrition talk without showing the new American plate, which recently got a new graphic. This was new to me. I learned something preparing for this talk. It used to be like a sketch, and now it's a picture, so it actually looks more like food, thankfully. So the new American plate, and this is from the American Institute for Cancer Research, and their website, like I said, is excellent, and you should check it out. 2/3 or more of your diet should come from plant food, and within plant foods, again, Cheetos is mostly a plant food, but that's not what they're talking about here. They're talking about fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, seeds, herbs, spices, all those wonderful things. 1/3 or less of your plate from animal protein. What's animal protein? It's the obvious stuff, chicken, fish, beef, pork, lamb, but also milk, yogurt, cheese, eggs. Those are all animal foods, and animal protein specifically. So most of your plate should be vegetables, fruits, whole grains. This is broccoli. This is some zucchini with red bell peppers or something, brown rice, and some chicken. How does this compare, do you think, most American plates? What do you think? This plate's got half of it with vegetables, right? Probably half of most plates are taken up with the meat and the baked potato or something like that, right? Or there's a lot of people that are carbitarians, I call them. Mm-hmm.
The quantity on that plate seems minimal compared to what you're
That's
serving.
right, yes. So there's proportion of our diet. She's saying the quantity on this plate seems, not like restaurant portions, right? This plate, you can have a bigger plate or you can have a smaller plate depending on your size and your nutritional needs. If we want to lose weight, we got to make this plate smaller, but the proportion should stay the same, roughly, where half of our diet is from veggies and fruits and things like that, and just enough of carbs and enough protein to give us some energy and the vitamins we need from them, and enough protein. But you're right, these are like normal, these are actually good portion sizes versus what normally are served. I know that meat, is kind of small, right? I know Holly's husband would be, he'd be like, where's the meat? Okay, so now we know why and what we should be doing. Now, how do we, I hope you guys can appreciate a slide coming up here. How do we apply this knowledge? So here's the question, added sugar versus naturally occurring sugar. Naturally occurring sugars are in the whole fruits. Again, yes, there's naturally occurring sugar in juice, but I try to get my patients to not drink fruit juice. Vegetable juice is different. Much, much, much less sugar in vegetable juice, but there's a lot of sugar in fruit juice. Milk, lactose, that naturally occurring sugar there. Plain yogurt also contains lactose. Fruit yogurt, contains lactose plus whatever they sweeten it with. It's not like it's just milk, culture, and strawberries. There's a whole bunch of other things they put in there too. So why do we use added sugars? Historically, there was good reason. If you need it, or if anyone does canning or jarring, if you want to make fruit preserves and have them last all winter or whatever till you need them next, sugar is a really good preservative, and so is salt. That's why canned stuff is either sugary or salty. Sugars also make food taste better, right? I remember growing up, my grandma sprinkling sugar on my sliced strawberries, like they needed it, but hey, I ate the strawberries because she put sugar on them, right? And then fruit is also, some people, again, back to the conspiracy, do they add extra sugars to make us crave food more and to make us addicted, potentially, and I think of it more of like training your mouth to want these things. are creatures of habit. And so if you always get that 3 p.m. little sweet treat or whatever at work, you condition your body to look for that. You condition, like, same thing you can do with salt too. People that kind of are restricting salt in their diet for health reasons, at first food tastes bland, tasteless, you know, you're like, oh, the horror, right? Then you get used to it after a while. The more you kind of just accept it and move on. And when you taste something that has salt in it, you're like, whoa, this is so salty. So our body can acclimate to whatever we kind of challenge it with. So similarly with sugar, the more we cut back on it, even like stevia, right? Super popular right now, stevia. It's a natural, artificial, or not artificial, it's a natural, non-nutritive sweetener. So it doesn't have sugar in it, but it sweetens food. And my patients were like, well, what about stevia? Can I use stevia? I was like, yeah, you can use stevia, but I treat those type of things, stevia, equal, Splenda, whatever, treat them like regular sugar, and you should be trying to use as little as you can get away with to train your mouth out of wanting that sweet flavor. And just appreciating the natural sugar and the natural taste and sweetness of the food the way it is from the ground or from the earth or with just minimal human processing. So stevia, sugar, all that stuff, try to use less and train your mouth out of craving for those things. Okay, so here's the picture I hope you like. Does anyone know who this is? Benedict Cumberbatch. Thank you very much. He's the newest Sherlock Holmes in like the BBC series or whatever, some British series. So this is when we all need to become detectives. How the heck do we find the added sugars in our food? So we'll whip out our magnifying glass and we'll try to find these added sugars. And so, because when you look at a food label, who has tried to figure out how much added sugar is in, yogurt's the easiest example, I would say. How much added sugar is in yogurt? Anyone have an idea? We think a lot. If you look at that, you turn that label, in fact, let's skip ahead to this picture. Dannon fruit, or whatever, this thing. 6 ounces of Dannon fruit on the bottom yogurt. Again, I'm not picking on brands. It was just to give exact information. You have to use brands, because if you generalize, that they vary so much. 6 ounces of Dannon fruit on the bottom yogurt has about 3 teaspoons of added sugar, but there are about 3 teaspoons of natural sugar in there from the lactose. But when you turn that label and you look, total carbohydrates, sugar, and it says 24 grams, you don't know what was natural and what was added. So, drum roll. In 2016 or 2017, maybe, depending on the government, there are going to be new food labels. So in those proposed new food labels, they are going to have to distinguish added sugar versus naturally occurring sugar to make our lives easier. Thank you very much. Yes. I mean, unless, hopefully no lobbyist gets in there, right, and it makes it not happen. But I'm pretty sure it's been so supported, it's going to happen to help us as consumers make better decisions about what we're eating. Because again, you look at 24 grams of sugar on a yogurt and you're like, wow, that's a lot, Some of my patients get confused. They look at milk and they're like, there's 12 grams of sugar in this milk, so I didn't drink it, But it's just the naturally occurring sugar, and we don't have a problem with that. I mean, if you have diabetes, you have to count it, but it's not something we say you can't eat. So for perspective on, we're pointing out the added sugars in these foods. A soda has 8 teaspoons of added sugar. Can you imagine? 8. This is a 12-ounce soda, 8 teaspoons. Who puts sugar in their coffee in the morning? Confessions, right? Brave soul. How many teaspoons do you put? Like 1 or 2, right? Can you imagine putting 8 teaspoons of sugar in a 12-ounce coffee? That's a lot of sugar. When we are doing it ourselves, it's a lot more awareness. But how many teaspoons of sugar in a grande caramel frappuccino from Starbucks? 15 teaspoons of added sugar. Again, if you were doing that yourself, you'd be like, ooh, and you might cut back. But you drink it at Starbucks and ignorance is bliss, You don't know. I used to work at Starbucks too, so I can pick on them a little bit. It's 15. That's huge. In just a grande. Whipped cream, that, barely made a difference because that was just fat. The Frappuccino itself had a bunch of sugar. 2 Reese's peanut butter cups have about 5 teaspoons of added sugar. True confessions, the foods that are on here, are like some of my favorites. So I put them on here for self-awareness. Half a cup of Ben & Jerry's Chubby Hubby ice cream. Half cup. I mean, how much is that, 6.5 teaspoons of added sugar. Man. So plain ice cream, just FYI, plain vanilla ice cream, it's like the best choice. All the caramel swirl and the chocolate chunks and the only if there's like nuts added is it probably okay. All the other stuff adds tons more sugar. So again, we already looked at the Dannon fruit on the bottom yogurt. Nature Valley granola bar has about 3 teaspoons of added sugar. It's not like they just put some oats and something like that. They had to bind it all together and make it taste sweet and delicious. So again, just imagine sprinkling 3 teaspoons of sugar on your oatmeal or something. Maybe, I guess that's kind of possible. But when we do it ourselves, we are much more aware of how much is actually going on there than when we just ignorantly eat these delicious things. A cup of blueberries, 0 teaspoons of added sugar. So one thing I read, and I guess I think about it indirectly, but I really liked seeing it explicitly stated. With your allowance of added sugars, what should we be doing with those? So yes, there's always room for splurge and for the Ben & Jerry's and whatever and stuff like that. You may want to use your special allowance on that. But one way, how do we control added sugars, but in the healthiest way? Try to use them to make nutritious foods more palatable, so that way you get the nourishment from that nutritious food, and so maybe there was a little bit of added sugar with it, but at least you still ate the nourishing food. So like, you take your own yogurt, your plain yogurt, and you might add 1 teaspoon of honey yourself, right? And you're like, you see that again, and you're like, okay, well that's 1 teaspoon of added sugar, but that's not the 3 teaspoons that Dannon added to it, Or if you need a little bit of sugar on your plain oatmeal, again, it's not maybe not those 3 teaspoons that Nature Valley put in that tiny granola bar. Or if you are trying to drink green tea but you just don't love it, maybe you could just do like a little pinch of sugar just to take, a little sweetness to it. Or again, the berries or something. Not that, you want to go out of your way to do this, but if it's making a really healthy food more likely that you're going to eat it, it's probably the best use of an added sugar than just a pixie stick, I say this again too with things like, kids or even adults. If you're trying to eat broccoli, but you don't love broccoli, the little bit of ranch dip that you might need to get yourself to eat or someone else to eat that broccoli, it's still better that you eat that broccoli than, the trade-off for a little bit of some kind of flavoring. So I kind of look at it that way a little bit. There's a little bit of the give and take there. So what do we do? And oh, by the way, that handout, the one added sugars, if you didn't get that one, I didn't want to put a daunting list of added sugars up on here, but this is for your detective lens. Yeah, this is not a complete list, but it is a big list of added sugars that can be added to food. So until those labels change, what can we do to try to determine how much added sugar is in our food? You have to look at the ingredient list on a food item. Ingredient lists in the US must be labeled by how much of a food is in there. So the first ingredient, there's the most of it by weight. So, and as the list gets smaller, there's less of it. So when you're looking at a food label, if one of those added sugars that's on that list there is towards the top of that ingredient list, it's probably got a lot of added sugar in it. So while we don't know how many grams of added sugar in something, and you can't really count it up now, you can get a clue that something's going to have a lot of added sugar if it's, those list of sugars are pretty high up in the ingredient list, or if it's on there at all, right? Like ketchup, someone said that earlier. They add sugar to ketchup. They add sugar to salad dressing. They add sugar to things that, are salty or savory and you wouldn't think have sugar. There's sugar added. So it's not like it's just the obvious soda and candy and that kind of stuff, the ones we know are sweet. The sugar is lurking all around. And some of it is this whole addictiveness or maybe some of it's shelf-stable stuff, but probably a lot of it is to make us want to drink it and eat it and take it more. So food manufacturers and food scientists are smart about making food palatable. A pinch of sugar here, a couple pinches of sugar there, helps it taste better to us. We're going to eat more of it, but adds sugar.
Yes, but you discussed bread. Is there a lot of sugar in bread?
So is there a lot of sugar in bread? So it depends. Thankfully, we live in 2015. Thankfully and not, we have so much more sugar in the food supply, but at least we have so many health conscious people that care. And there are many, many, many brands to choose from. Some breads have a lot of added sugar. If anyone's homemade bread, you need a little sugar in the beginning to feed the yeast to kind of start the fermentation, right? But that's like a very small amount for an entire loaf of bread. It's kind of negligible. Plus the yeast itself is like digesting it for you, basically. So, but many breads have added sugar to make them more palatable and to taste good. Similarly with salt, you'd be surprised at how much salt is in bread too. Some of that is for, again, the leavening and helping the bread to rise, but a lot of it's for taste. So if you look at a bread label, and if it's, whole wheat bread even, if you see sugar grams in there, that is likely to all be added sugar. Because if you just took wheat, ground it up into flour, added some yeast and whatever, and salt and water, that's not sugar there, so they're adding the sugar to the bread label. So you can look on the food label and look at grams of sugar, not total carbs, but grams of sugar, and that'll give you a clue of how much added sugar is in there. So there's big variability. Some are low sugar, no sugar. Some have a lot. Sorry for that long answer for that.
How about like coconut, healthy sugar, what they call the coconut sugar?
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, agave, that's another one. Oh, well, okay, xylitol is different. Okay. Coconut sugar she's asking about, or agave is real popular too. Those are all still added sugars in the end, because what are you doing with coconut sugar? You're adding it to something else to make it taste good. Yes, there are differences in the fructose, like agave is super high in fructose. Or there's some differences in mineral composition but again, hopefully you're not eating so much sugar that you're relying on that coconut sugar for some calcium or something. That'd be a lot of coconut sugar you'd need to eat to get a significant amount of minerals or something. So I think there are certainly small differences, and if you look down the sugar aisle at a natural food store, there's a huge selection. In the end, it's all still added sugar, and they all fall under the try to do less with those things. Again, it's training your mouth. So now what happens when we over-consume sugar? Hopefully, if you're working on it and you're no one's perfect overnight, so we make these small steps and try to get better over time, and I'm guilty too. We're all guilty here, I'm sure. Some of my patients are so good, and at least what they tell me, they're so good. So what do? Overindulgence will happen. How do we cope? Now, if overindulgence happens every day, I hope you guys get a good pair of running shoes, because you really want to try to work it off. You really can help prevent that crazy rise in blood sugar if you go and use that sugar. Now, I don't know if that's a good strategy if you're like, I'm going to eat this whatever, but I'll go for a run. If you're an athlete, it's a different thing. They have to replenish. But if you're just trying to do this interesting, getting away with added sugars because you will exercise. But even still, that's kind of like the ranch dressing on the broccoli. If it gets you to work out, maybe it's a good thing. If you can justify a little bit of indulgence, but you'll go and do some exercise, it's still good that you did exercise in the end. So if you overdo it, try to move your body significantly, for 15 or 20 minutes. And I'm not talking about just strolling around the Stanford shopping center leisurely, but really, get a little sweat on your brow or something, get your heart rate up a little bit so that you can burn off that sugar. And then also, don't get down on yourself. This happens. The dietitian admits it. I eat sugar, I try to cut back, but I'm human too. I don't let it get to me. I move on to the next day and I say, okay, well, I'm going to do better at the next meal, or I'm going to do better tomorrow. What happens for some people, they get so down on themselves, they feel like they've backtracked, and then instead of getting right back on track, they just are like, well, I already blew it, so then I'm going to go do this, this, and this. But that's, the opposite of what we should try to do. You should just try to accept it and move on and move forward and do the right thing the next time, and think about why did that happen, and what could I do differently to set myself up for success? Hanging out by the buffet table, or walking by the person with the candy jar, if that's a temptation for you, you're setting yourself up for failure. So, try to change up your routine a little bit, or ask people not to offer you things that, you don't want to be eating but are hard to turn down. So, pick yourself up and move on is my recommendation for that. So here, I'll just briefly point out some of the good websites. I know this is like daunting to see these references, but I'll tell you like what was good about each of these sites. So this one, the American Heart Association, had one about added sugars. So they've got a really nice section on their site. If you just do American Heart Association sugar, you Google that, you'll come up with like their whole section of their site is really excellent. Similarly, the Harvard School of Public Health, Stanford's awesome. Harvard School of Public Health has this excellent resource, so we should cross, reference each other. They come up with, they send emails periodically, and they have really good summaries. So they have one about added sugar in the diet. They also have a really good one on the glycemic index and glycemic load. Some of where I got some of this information was from Wikipedia and then some of their references, so I double-checked everything that they put on there. National Geographic has an interesting kind of article, a little bit more on history, so that's where I got some of that historical data. The Linus Pauling Institute at Oregon State University has a pretty good, they have good info on like herbs and spices and antioxidants and things like that, and they also have some good stuff on added sugars. If you haven't been to oncologynutrition.org, it's a website that's all created by oncology dietitians. They have a really long and good sugar and cancer article on there, specific just to sugar and cancer. So I think that one's worth looking at. And again, the Harvard School of Public Health has another one about carbohydrates and blood sugar. And Sugary Drinks Fact Sheet. So the Harvard one's excellent too. How much time do we have for questions? Do we know? Who's got the time? Oh, nice. Okay. Okay, I'll start with you since you're standing up.
When the human body turns sugar into cholesterol, and is the cholesterol in eggs, is that high density lipoprotein or low density lipoprotein?
Okay, so can the human body turn sugar into cholesterol? That is a good question. I do not know for sure, but what we usually say is that saturated fat in the diet is what usually tells your body to make more cholesterol. Your liver makes cholesterol. Usually what we say is saturated fat stimulates your body or tells your body to make more cholesterol. Now that is separate from like that thing saying that the American Heart Association saying high sugar intake is linked with increased risk of cardiovascular death. Not everything about cardiovascular risk factors is cholesterol levels. So does sugar promote inflammation? Does sugar promote like a pressure differential in blood flow and like hypertension and things like that? So I'm not aware of a direct link between sugar and making cholesterol. But I would think it would have to do more with saturated fat and then the other reasons that sugar increase cardiovascular risk. For the second question you asked about, do eggs contain high density or low density lipoprotein? So there again, cholesterol in an egg, in the yolk of an egg, when we eat it, doesn't equal exact cholesterol in our body. So what does our body do when it eats the cholesterol of an egg? It breaks it down into a whole bunch of things and then it gets into our bloodstream. And how does our body respond to it? I guess I don't know exactly how to answer that question, but what I'll say is eggs are not as bad as the rap they used to get from years ago, because dietary cholesterol that's in that egg does not equal cholesterol made by your liver. It's the saturated fat. Again, where's saturated fat? Meat, the fat on meat, chicken skin, animal fats. But also it's in a few plant fats, but mostly it's animal fats. So what we usually say, if you're worried about cholesterol levels, I'm not as worried about eggs, but I'm also biased where I like, pasture raised, or if your neighbor has some chickens and feeding them, letting them eat bugs and letting them eat some greens and flax seeds, I think those egg yolks are better than just the average grocery store egg. So I think those are the best. I'm not worried about especially those kind of eggs and body cholesterol. American Heart Association used to say, 3 eggs a week. They've got away from that statement because there's not enough data. And also, it's not the dietary cholesterol, it's the saturated fat. Some people now say like 1 egg a day is about right, or 7 a week, I guess, if you want to think about it that way. So they're less demonized than they used to be. Long, I know, I'm sorry. I give long answers because it's all complicated questions.
Yeah, doesn't the brain need sugar to operate?
Doesn't the brain need sugar to operate? I'm so glad you asked that question. Not a plant, okay. I didn't pay him to say that. So this is where sugar is extra tricky, right? Do we need sugar to function? Our brain, yes, it wants sugar. Our liver, the preferred fuel, the preferred substrate, if you want to hear it in how we talk about it, is sugar. But guess what? We can make all the sugar we need from carbohydrates in the diet. We do not have a physiologic, biologic need to eat sugar because we can make it from carbohydrate. We can make it from the quinoa, we can make it from the wheat berry, we can make it from whatever, lactose, So we don't need it. So this is what adds to the whole thing is like, we need certain vitamins, we need protein, we need some carbs, we don't need sugar, and we can make whatever we need. Even people that go on like a really strict low carb diet, even if you don't eat very many carbs, your body, because you need a certain amount of blood sugar for your brain to function and for, again, your organs and all your cells to work, it's clever enough, it can make sugar from protein and from fat. It's called gluconeogenesis. So it's not the most efficient pathway, and it has some positive and negative effects on the body, but it's a protection mechanism so you don't get low blood sugar, which you can die from. Like if anyone has overdosed on insulin or anything, low blood sugar is very dangerous. So we have this protective mechanism. We do not need to eat sugar in the diet. We can make it when we need it. Mm-hmm. So it's purely for fun that we eat sugar. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Yes, you mentioned xylitol.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, yeah. So xylitol. Xylitol, and there's a few other, anytime you hear it ending in that all, maltitol, xylitol, there's a few others. These are what we call sugar alcohols. They do not appear to raise blood sugar levels very much. And according to the American Dental Association, not only are they not cariogenic or don't cause cavities, but they appear to have protective benefits for our teeth. So a lot of like the sugar-free gums that are in like a natural food store will be sweetened with xylitol because technically it's not an artificial sweetener, it's just the sugar alcohol. And it may even be particularly protective for your teeth. The only tricky thing with the sugar alcohols, so they won't raise your blood sugar levels like other carbs will, but if you overeat sugar alcohols, like you'd have to have like 8 or 10 grams of these sugar alcohol a day, they can have a laxative effect. So you must be careful with those. Or like that other one, lactulose, that sugar that was in one of those disaccharides, that is a laxative that you can give people to help them have bowel movements. It's very effective. Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you can actually touch on endurance sports where people who are involved in training for endurance sports actually intake a lot of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And do they have any results of, even though you're burning the sugar, is there any results that you know of that it's still harmful?
That's a great question. So she's asking endurance athletes, we know that, when you are working out at a very high level for more than 60 minutes, you need to replenish the carbohydrate in the body, and you kind of have to do it quickly. So as good as quinoa is, if you eat some quinoa and that's not going to raise your blood sugar for an hour from now, and you're an endurance athlete, maybe she's going to run out of steam and she's not going to be able to keep doing at the same intensity. So a lot of athletes have to have glucose or different simple carbohydrate replenishment to help fuel their sport. Again, most kids, most people do not need to be drinking Gatorade unless you are doing more than 60 minutes of rigorous physical activity. That is when you need replacing the sugar, the electrolytes, and things like that. Water is what most people need when they're working out, unless, again, you're these endurance athletes. So you do need to replace that because it's a matter of not just performance, but your health. You need to be able to protect your body and keep your blood sugar levels at the right range. I'm not aware, but I could, if you want, I can get your email. One of the other dietitians I work with is like a sports dietitian. She may be aware. and they're a group of dietitians that specialize in this. They have this website called, if you Googled SCAN DPG, and it stands for Dietetic Practice Group, they have some fact sheets on their site. I'm not aware of studies showing like detrimental effects of like the sugar replacement in the athletes. I would think it would be not a huge deal because of all the exercise you're doing. Is it burning off the sugar, and is that why it's not a big deal? Or is it just that you exercise so much and there's so many huge benefits from exercise? I don't know, but people that do really super duper duper endurance athletes for a lot of their lives, it does have some negatives to it. You know, it's not all positive. So, but I'm not aware of it in a cancer relationship. But that's an interesting question. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sorry, this is sort of a bit of an anecdote to one story I know of, and it's not related to cancer.
Okay.
But a young man, a Finn, who is an entrepreneur here, is a super duper triathlete. Was, triathlon, did the Ironman multiple times, finished, second in his class for a 30 to 35-year-old or something, and ate a lot of goo, right? Because he's exercising all these hours. And he actually was like a David statue, right? He was just this perfection of an athlete, and was diagnosed pre-diabetic because of all the goo that he was consuming. And so he and his wife rode from California to Hawaii recently, last summer actually, to bring awareness to the fact that these high sugar consumption packets are actually detrimental to even the most outstanding
Even fit athletes, yeah. I mean, and there are products out there that are lower sugar, or more complex carbs that I think are becoming more and more popular. But just for the people watching online, she was talking about how she knows someone that ended up getting diabetes, they think probably related to the amount of like goo replacement energy things he had been taking, even though he was a super triathlete. So yeah, I mean, even for the fittest people, should we be taking in these very large amounts of these things? So I don't know if we know the answer to that, but it's a good question. Mm-hmm.
Because I think people nowadays are also scared of eating fruits because it has a lot of sugar. Eating the fruit itself with fiber is the best way, not juicing. My question is fruit metabolized a little bit different than any other foods because it does have a higher fructose level?
Well, yeah.
Liver, or is it okay for diabetics to eat fruit?
Yes. So a lot of the information, we've been studying diabetes for a long time, so it actually helps us to understand it for other conditions too. We do still allow and recommend that people with diabetes do eat fruits. So what the thing is with fruits is we want to make sure that you're eating not too much of it, and that even within fruit there is some variation. Like something like berries, you could eat like a cup of berries and get the same amount of carbohydrate that's in like half of a banana. But not very many people eat just half of a banana. I mean, some people do, but you think it's a single serving, so you finish the whole thing. So she asked also about, does our body metabolize it differently? Well, like she was saying, the fiber slows the digestion. So like that glycemic index thing again, slows how quickly the blood sugar will rise and to what extent. It's because it's more complex and takes more time. The fructose in it having a detrimental effect, some people in the kind of extremer categories of diet and cancer do recommend limiting certain fruits. I do not believe, well, they'll limit all fruits actually, some of the like extreme people. I think there's much more data showing that there are benefits to eating the fruits than any particular harms to eating them. But again, there are the people out there that are cancer survivors or cancer, like trying to prevent the risk of recurrence or something like that, that they say cutting out like almost all carbohydrates, doesn't matter if it's healthy or not. So I don't think that there's enough data to do that for everyone or, even anyone potentially. There is going to be some interesting studies coming out on what they call a ketogenic diet or like fasting around the time of treatment. These are some kind of new things that are being studied. I know it's kind of not exactly answering your question, but I do not tell people to limit fruits. What I tell them is we need 2 to 3 servings of fruit per day, and a serving of fruit is roughly half a cup. Yes, there's variation between, again, banana and berries, or, you know, there's other examples, or like grapes and something else, watermelon. But people with diabetes, people with cancer survivors, you know, the general population should be trying to eat 2 to 3 servings of whole fruit per day to get the benefit, but not excessive amounts of sugar. Mm-hmm.
Does it help if I have a protein while I'm eating my fruit?
Yes, it does help if you have a protein while you're eating the fruit. There again, if you look for stuff on the internet, you find all kinds of interesting things. Some people say you can't eat fruit with anything else. You have to eat it alone because it'll, you know, ferment in your digestive tract, and that causes a bunch of problems. I mean, yeah, there's all kinds of interesting stuff you can search for out there. I think there is benefit to having what we call, or to not having naked carbs. This is another thing, like if you just have fruit alone, the fruit is going to raise the blood sugar, not as fast as the pixie stick, but it'll still raise the blood sugar. But when we were talking about glycemic load and you add some fat or something like that to it, or if you add protein to it, again, we know this for people with diabetes, if you have carbs combined with protein or with fat or both, it slows that digestion of that carbohydrate and that rise in the blood sugar as well. So I do recommend that people, when you have some fruit, have some almonds with it. Have some plain yogurt. You know, put the fruit in your plain yogurt to help give it the fruit sweetness without adding sugar. Or, you know, have some avocado with, you know, your mango or something like that. The fat will help slow the carbohydrate digestion. So yes, I do recommend combining a little bit to help slow carbohydrate digestion. I'm gonna check her really quick. Mm-hmm.
Well, I had radiation to my head and neck for mucosal melanoma, and the radiation affected my taste buds.
Mm-hmm.
And food did not taste like anything. It was very difficult to eat. So I was basically subsisting on something like Ensure,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but that's basically a ton of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
So just for future reference, what would have been a better choice to be able to get calories
Sure.
in me?
And I take care of people. So she's saying when she was treated for a head and neck cancer and had a lot of taste issues and probably painful difficulty chewing and swallowing, she drank a lot of the oral nutrition beverages like Ensure or Boost or something equivalent that are pretty high in sugar. If anyone's looked at them, I mean, again, if you try to make that in your own kitchen, like, do you have all those ingredients on hand to make that? Probably not, hopefully not. But it's something that's a really useful tool that people use during treatment. I don't tell my patients they can't have those type of things. Like, I think it is helpful and it's super easy to get, and they can use it during treatment. There are currently some other and better options, maybe, you know, according to who you ask. Some of our doctors don't care, to be honest. They're like, just don't lose weight, however you do it, you know. Yeah. Yes. So, and there's truth to that, but I think for the more sophisticated patient, there also is choice within those drinks. So there are some of them, one of them nowadays, if we're going to do brand names here, Orgain is super easily available, and it's like an organic, more natural, lower sugar, Ensure type of drink. But it's only 250 calories per container. And when you're going through head and neck cancer treatment, you need a lot more than that. There's one called ENU, E-N-U, that has about 480 calories per bottle. It has a lot of carbohydrate, but again, it's like more complex carbs and not the sugars. The calories have to come from somewhere in a drink. So the calories are coming from carbs, they're coming from fat, and they're coming from protein. And just to keep like a normal balance, it's got to have carbs. So it doesn't have a lot of sugar, but it does have carbohydrate. So those are two commercially available ones. I had more creative patients go, there's this stuff called Liquid Hope, which was made for tube feeding, like to go here, but it's basically kind of like a high calorie soup. And so one of my patients wanted to drink that. And like, you know, if you can't taste anything anyway and it feels okay in your throat, they would do that Liquid Hope tube feeding, but take it by mouth. And they would add extra oil and stuff like that to it too. So there are, if you have a savvy enough dietitian or healthcare provider, there are options out there to know about. But to be honest, you know, we don't push it on the patients. You kind of have to ask, and then we tell you about the variety of options, because these things are harder to get too. You know, they're not just like on every Walgreens shelf. You got to go out of your way to find some of these special things. They are out there. They are better options, but it takes some effort to get them. Mm-hmm. You had a question here, yeah?
Is there a difference when you have fresh or cooked vegetables or fruits?
Mm-hmm. So, is there a difference between like raw or cooked fruits and vegetables and their health properties? So, here again, where there's the extremes, right? All raw diet. You have to eat everything raw, and if you cook it, you know, it becomes useless. I don't think that's true. I think we should get a combination in our diet. We should get variety. You know, I like to include almost everyone and everything in every form, you know. So try to get some things cooked, some things raw. Certain nutrients are more easily absorbed when they're cooked. So like a tomato has more lycopene available to our body when we cook it. Or I even heard recently, apparently blueberries have a little bit more of one of their phytonutrients available to us if they're cooked. Not, you know, maybe not like just blueberry pie filling, you know, I'm not talking about that kind of thing. But, you know, if like you've like cooked the blueberries a little bit in your oatmeal or something like that. So I think it's important to have variety. More important though, eat it whichever way you like the taste of it more, because then you're more likely to eat more of it, and there's benefit to eating more of it, right? Than, you know, if you force down that one piece of raw whatever, you know, if you'll eat a whole bunch of it cooked, eat that, because then you'll eat more.
So eat a whole bunch of it raw too? No?
You can do that too. I think that, yeah, I mean, the more raw is usually a little bit better, because certain vitamins can be destroyed with heat. So if you want to err in one way, err on the side of raw, I suppose, but don't feel like you won't get any benefit if something's cooked. Mm-hmm.
I've read and heard from people that fresh fruits and vegetables often have pesticides on them. And it's tough to get the pesticides off. I mean, more than just rinsing. But, I mean, how do you reconcile the nutritional value versus the solution value?
So he's asking about basically, do we need to get all organic food, or how do we reduce the pesticide that's on our produce, or how do we approach fresh produce, get all the benefit, but not with unnecessary amounts of pesticides? So there is a thing called the Dirty Dozen, and you can Google the Dirty Dozen food, maybe put that word on it too. Careful what you Google nowadays, right? Or if you go to ewg.org, that's the Environmental Working Group. They're the group that made this thing called the Dirty Dozen. They've taken data from the USDA that says how much pesticide is still left on a food in the edible portion that we eat. You know, so something like pineapple, you know, we don't eat the outside of it. I mean, you know, I guess some people that juice will do that, but, you know, generally we don't eat the outside of it. So if it has a bit of pesticide residue on the outside, but you cut that off and it's not internal pesticide residue, then, you know, you don't necessarily need to get the organic version of pineapple, for one example, because that's not pesticide on the part we eat. But something like berries and spinach and apple and celery and like cherry tomatoes, peaches, some of those foods have a lot of pesticide residue in the portion that we get, even if we wash the heck out of that apple skin. If you don't get the organic version, it's more likely to have pesticide residue. So there is the Dirty Dozen is a guide that can say, you know, don't spend your money. I mean, if you can get organic everything, good for you. If you're like, how do I prioritize? Don't spend your money on organic avocados necessarily, but you could get, you know, you should spend it on the spinach and berries and apple, for example. So it kind of helps you pick and choose. So then when you have the produce, the best thing to do, mostly this is from a bacteria perspective, is to wash it under running water with friction. So there's all those washes and stuff out there, and according to the USDA and all that, they don't remove more bacteria and things like that. I think it's more for our, you know, I would say it's more of a behavior thing. If you use a special wash, you might pay a little extra attention to how you're cleaning it. So you might, you know, do a better job just washing it and using friction overall. So You don't have to use those special washes, but what you should use is running water and friction, or something like a berry. You know, if you have a little spray thing, this is totally anecdotal, this is not science, this is my opinion. If you spray it with like those spray washer things, I think you can get a lot more of the dirt off of like something like a berry with all the crevices and stuff. Or if you soak it and rinse, you know, change the water a few times, that's going to get a lot more off than if you just, you know, wash them the way my husband washes fruit, you know. It like barely swipes it under the water, you know. So, but that's not necessarily pesticide removal. That's just the bacteria, because many of the pesticides are fat soluble or like lipid soluble, and they're kind of stuck in the skin. So you can peel it, but then you lose some of the benefits of, you know, that's on the peel. So use the Dirty Dozen to buy your organic produce is what I usually tell my patients.
Is there an amount that we I guess it's the amount that you eat. I mean, if we eat a regular serving every day, is that going to be, we're going to be loading up on pesticides too?
Well, what me and I would say most oncology dietitians say, or most health professionals, it's still better for you to eat the fresh produce than for you to avoid it because of the concern of pesticides. Like the benefits you get from it still outweigh, you know, some kind of pesticide residue on it. Pesticides are, again, a whole nother controversial topic. But I do think there is benefit to getting the organic version for many foods. And you'll see on our like survivorship nutrition handout that's up here, like the very last bullet point, I think, is opt for organic when possible, you know, or when available, and if it's not bankrupting you. But so we don't know an exact amount, but I would say use the Dirty Dozen as a guide, but still eat the apple if you were not going to eat a fruit and that was the only one available. Still better for you to eat the fruit than not. Any other questions? I'm sure we're so many things to talk about, but we're running out of time. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alison.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you, everybody.